There comes a moment when someone questions your intentions in front of everyone, and silence descends upon the room. You feel eyes piercing your skin like invisible needles, that pit in your stomach that feels like it's swallowing you from the inside, the pressure in your chest screaming at you to defend yourself. Explain, justify every word and action so you don't end up looking like the villain of the story. Most people react exactly the same way. They start talking fast, stumbling over nervous explanations, hands gesticulating wildly, a slightly higher-pitched voice, eyes desperately seeking approval. That wasn't my intention. What I really meant was, if you'll just let me explain. And the more they explain, the more guilty they seem. It's an ancient trap Machiavelli identified 500 years ago. In that precise instant, without realizing it, they surrender all their power. Because by explaining themselves, they unconsciously accept that others have the moral authority to judge them, and that power, once given away, never returns to your hands. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you Machiavelli's 7 brutal lessons that will build an impenetrable mental fortress around your mind. You'll understand the psychological error that makes you vulnerable even when you're right. You'll learn the exact technique the most respected leaders use when publicly attacked. You'll master the complete system so your mind is never again held hostage by others' opinions. The truth nobody tells you is simple. He who explains himself submits. He who holds his center dominates. Leave a like if this has already made you think, and join me on this journey. Think of your mind as an ancient fortress. Most people build weak walls that any verbal attack can tear down. But true mental fortresses don't just resist. They reflect attacks back to their origin with greater force, using the attacker's energy against themselves. That's the fortress we will build today, stone by stone, with Machiavelli's teachings. Let me explain exactly where most people unknowingly lose their power. The fundamental error 97% of people make is an emotional trap so deeply ingrained that we don't even question it. From childhood, we're taught that we must explain ourselves, justify ourselves, defend ourselves when accused, tell the truth and everything will be okay. That childish lesson, which seemed noble and honest, becomes the sword others use to emotionally destabilize you as an adult. Observe what happens in any given meeting. Someone questions a decision you made. The average person immediately leans forward, speaks faster, raises their voice, gesticulates excessively while detailing every reason behind their decision. Result: they seem nervous, insecure, as if they have something to hide. The strategic individual, on the other hand, maintains a relaxed posture, remains silent for 3 full seconds, and responds with fewer words than expected, sometimes even with a question. Result: they project absolute confidence, as if the accusation is so irrelevant it barely deserves attention. The consequences extend far beyond that momentary interaction. In the short term, you lose credibility in that specific conversation. In the medium term, you're unconsciously labeled as someone who needs to be supervised, questioned, verified. In the long term, your word automatically loses value. Every explanation builds your reputation of weakness, brick by brick. Why do we constantly fall into this trap? The psychology behind it is fascinating and multi-layered. It's not just fear of rejection. It's something deeper and more primitive. It's the tribal instinct to preserve our position in the social group. Our limbic brain, which controls our emotional reactions, doesn't distinguish between social rejection and a physical threat. The same brain region that activates the fear of being devoured by a predator lights up when we feel our reputation is threatened. It's like a runaway horse. You can have the best training, the best saddle, the best intentions, but if primitive fear takes control, the horse will drag you exactly where you don't want to go. The average person reacts to questioning as if it were a mortal threat. Their nervous system enters a fight or flight state. The problem is that, in the modern social context, both responses are equally destructive. Verbally attacking makes you seem aggressive and insecure. Defending yourself makes you seem weak and guilty. The only way out is a response the primitive brain isn't programmed to offer: strategic calm. Perhaps you recognize these signs in yourself. Maybe you've been in a meeting where your project was questioned and you felt that immediate urge to justify every detail, speaking more than necessary while noticing you were losing the room's attention. Or when your partner made an insinuation about your behavior and you found yourself explaining your intentions in so much detail that you ended up looking guilty of something you hadn't even considered. Maybe you remember that social media post where someone misinterpreted your comment and you wrote a response 3 times longer than the original message, only to spark more criticism. Or when a family member questioned an important decision and you spent 30 minutes explaining it, only to hear at the end, well, if you have to explain it so much. Even today, when you think about these situations, you feel that urge to keep explaining yourself, as if the people involved could hear you now. It's like a game of chess where most people think explaining themselves is a smart defensive move, when in reality, it's a self-inflicted checkmate in 3 moves. The strategic person recognizes that every explanatory word is a step towards a position of inferiority. The ordinary person believes that more explanations generate more understanding, when the reality is exactly the opposite. More explanations generate more doubt. The true cost goes beyond each individual interaction. When you adopt the habit of constantly explaining yourself, something happens inside you. Your relationship with yourself changes. You start to need external approval to feel secure. Your self-worth becomes subject to others' interpretations. Your peace of mind depends on others' verdicts. You become an emotional hostage to anyone who decides to question you. Most people live in this invisible prison without realizing it, constantly searching for the perfect formula to explain themselves and finally be understood. The strategist knows that search is the trap itself, the dead-end labyrinth, but identifying the problem is only the beginning. Now I'm going to show you exactly what to do step by step in the 3 situations where you are most vulnerable. The core technique Machiavelli would apply today is divided into 4 precise moves you must execute in exact order. First, when questioned, don't respond immediately. Pause for 3 full seconds while maintaining neutral eye contact, neither aggressive nor submissive. This pause breaks the expected pattern and establishes temporary dominance. Second, take 1 deep breath, imperceptibly, which activates your parasympathetic system and prevents the primitive reaction. Third, respond with fewer words than expected, preferably redirecting with a question or making a lateral observation that subtly shifts the topic. Finally, maintain a neutral facial expression with slight curiosity, as if you're evaluating something interesting but not particularly important. Most people react with defensive and nervous energy, explaining themselves profusely. You should respond with calm, slightly curious energy, as if you're observing the exchange from the outside. The difference isn't subtle. It's a complete shift in dynamic. He who masters his explanations masters his world. Imagine you're in an executive meeting presenting quarterly results. The room is full, 15 people around the table, projector on, your presentation on screen. Suddenly, a colleague says, "These numbers seem manipulated to look better. Are you sure you're not hiding something?" All eyes turn to you, awaiting your reaction. Most people rush to defend themselves immediately. No, not at all. I can assure you they're completely accurate. I have all the data sources. I can show you exactly where each number comes from. I even have the original calculations in another presentation. And the more they talk, the more guilty they seem, the more the ship sinks, while the room perceives insecurity and possibly dishonesty. You, on the other hand, pause for 3 exact seconds. You maintain an upright yet relaxed posture. Your face shows slight interest, as if you'd been given a weather observation. Then, in a calm voice, slightly lower than normal, you say only, "Interesting perspective. What part specifically do you find problematic?" In that instant, the dynamic completely reverses. Now it's your accuser who must explain, detail, justify. The pressure has been transferred. The room no longer scrutinizes you. It observes your accuser trying to sustain a vague accusation. You didn't defend anything, but you controlled everything. Because in the game of power, he who explains loses. He who redirects wins. Apply this same principle to your personal life. You're at dinner with your partner. Suddenly they say, "Lately it feels like I don't matter to you as much as I used to." Tension falls upon the table like a concrete slab. The instinctive reaction is to list all the things you've done. Explain how busy you've been. Detail how much you truly care, almost begging for understanding. Result, you seem guilty and desperate, as if you're trying to compensate for something real. The conversation becomes a downward spiral where you try to convince and your partner finds more evidence of detachment in your desperation. Instead, you pause, maintain calm eye contact, and respond. "I'm interested in understanding better what makes you feel this way. What have you noticed specifically?" You don't deny, You don't affirm. You don't defend yourself. You show genuine interest in the other's perception without accepting implicit premises. The conversation transforms from accusation into joint exploration, where you maintain your emotional center intact. In the digital realm, this dynamic is exponentially amplified. Someone comments on your post. It's clear you don't know what you're talking about, typical of people like you. Your blood boils. Your fingers tingle to respond with an extensive explanation of your credentials, experience, and knowledge. The average person writes a paragraph justifying each point, listing achievements, experience, sources. With every word, they dig their own reputational grave, implicitly validating the criticism as worthy of an elaborate response. They voluntarily surrender their power to a stranger on the internet. You, applying the Machiavellian lesson, respond only, "Fascinating conclusion. What makes you think that?" Or simply, "Interesting perspective," and nothing more. Or in some strategic cases, you don't even respond, letting the void speak for you. Strategic silence on social media is the clearest demonstration of psychological power. He who controls his digital explanations controls his public image. However, there are three dangerous traps when applying this technique. The first error is confusing strategic calm with excessive emotional coldness. This occurs when you apply the technique mechanically without adapting it to the emotional context. Result: you seem robotic or psychopathic instead of centered and confident. It looks like control, but in reality it's disconnection. The correction is to maintain warmth in your eyes and tone, only limiting the explanatory verbal content. Second error: using the technique with genuinely close people who seek real connection, not power. Many apply this indiscriminately because it feels powerful. It leads to superficial and distant relationships. To avoid this, distinguish between questioning that is a power play and authentic conversations that seek mutual understanding. Third error, the most subtle and dangerous: turning non-explanation into a new form of disguised explanation. This is treacherous because it seems like you're applying the technique when in reality you fall into the same trap. If you notice that your short responses are actually coded forms of self-justification, stop and reconnect with your inherent self-worth that doesn't need external validation. This works perfectly on the surface, but there's a deeper level that Machiavelli understood better than anyone. A fundamental truth that separates those who simply apply techniques from those who truly master the game of mental power. The counterintuitive insight that changes everything is this: true strength doesn't come from external techniques, but from a complete reconnection with your inherent self-worth that requires no validation. Entire society is structured to make us dependent on external approval, from the educational system that rewards us with grades for pleasing authority, to social media that trains us to seek likes and positive comments. But on an intermediate level, when you observe closely, you notice something strange. The most powerful and influential people seem to operate from a completely different validation system. They don't seek approval, they assume it as a given. They don't try to be liked. They allow others to try to like them. This contradicts everything we've been taught about human relationships and social cooperation. The profound truth is exactly opposite to what most believe. Your mental power doesn't come from being validated by others, but from validating yourself so completely that external opinion becomes information, not definition. And this changes everything because it reverses the fundamental equation of social power. When your sense of worth is genuinely internal, external attempts to emotionally manipulate you bounce off like arrows against an impenetrable fortress. You no longer react by defending yourself because there's nothing to defend. Your self-worth isn't up for discussion. The true castle is invisible to the eyes but impenetrable to emotional siege. To understand the magnitude of this shift, observe this historical case. During a diplomatic crisis in 1975, Henry Kissinger was aggressively approached by reporters accusing him of disastrous foreign policy decisions. Instead of defending himself with the extensive list of achievements he could have enumerated, Kissinger paused, smiled slightly, and said, "Do any of you have questions for my answers?" With that simple inversion, he transformed a hostile interrogation into a demonstration of absolute control. This pattern constantly repeats throughout history. Observe how great leaders rarely defend themselves exhaustively. Notice how people with true authority respond less, not more, when questioned. See how individuals with authentic internal confidence allow temporary misunderstandings to exist without feeling the urgency to correct them immediately. Think about the last time you felt truly certain about something, so certain that you didn't need anyone else to confirm it. Perhaps technical knowledge you completely master, a skill you've perfected over years, or a personal truth you're absolutely convinced of. How do you react when someone questions that? Probably with genuine curiosity or even amusement, not nervous defensiveness. Why? Because in those specific areas, your validation is internal, not external. Now imagine extending that same solidity to your entire being. He who constantly seeks to be understood never completely understands himself. How do you truly internalize this paradigm shift? It's not enough to understand it intellectually. It must transform the way you perceive every social interaction. The fundamental shift occurs when you start to see questions not as threats to your self-worth, but as information about the questioner. Before, you interpreted criticism as, I must defend myself because my worth is being attacked. Now you interpret it as, this person needs to question me for reasons that reflect their internal state, not mine. Once you've internalized this perspective, you start to notice clear signs in your behavior. You no longer feel that visceral urge to immediately respond to criticism or questioning. You don't experience that tightness in your chest when someone misinterprets your intentions. You observe with genuine curiosity how people interpret your actions, like a scientist observing an experiment. Situations that once caused hours of mental rumination now pass through you without leaving emotional residue. And the most revealing thing, you discover you can be comfortable in silence, even when that silence might allow a temporarily unfavorable interpretation of you. True mastery is achieved when non-explanation stops being a technique you apply and simply becomes the natural result of your relationship with your own self-worth. The person who technically applies non-explanation is constantly vigilant, controlling their responses, weighing their words. The person who has fully incorporated the principle no longer needs that constant control. They simply don't feel the urge to justify themselves because they perceive no threat in the questioning. Your mind is your kingdom. He who controls explanations controls the narrative of his life. Now that you understand the profound philosophy, it's time to turn this understanding into an unstoppable practical system. I'm going to give you the 7 precise Machiavellian tools that will build your impregnable mental fortress. The first tool is called interrogative inversion. It consists of turning any accusation or questioning into a question that returns the pressure to the questioner. You use it specifically when someone publicly questions you, insinuates something negative about your intentions, or makes a claim about you that would require justification. It works like this in detail. When you receive the accusation, take the strategic 3-second pause. Then formulate a brief question that forces the other person to specify or elaborate. Finally, maintain absolute silence until they respond, no matter how uncomfortable that silence becomes. For example, when someone says, "It seems you don't care about the project," instead of defending yourself, you respond exactly, "What makes you think that?" with a neutral tone of genuine curiosity. Do not vary this basic structure. This precision is what generates the impact. The effect is immediate. The pressure is completely transferred to the accuser, and in the following minutes, you'll notice how they struggle to justify a perception they perhaps hadn't even fully analyzed. The second tool is the strategic void. This is the deliberate absence of response that creates a space where others project their own insecurities. You use it when the questioning is clearly malicious, when responding would legitimize an unfounded accusation, or when you want to establish a precedent that certain topics or tones don't deserve your energy. Its application requires precision. When you receive the questioning, maintain exactly the same facial expression without any perceptible change. Don't show surprise, annoyance, or amusement. Make eye contact for 3 exact seconds, then naturally shift your attention to something or someone else as if the interruption never happened. If you're in a group, direct a question to someone else about a completely different topic. The psychological effect is devastating. You create a void that the accuser feels an urge to fill, usually digging a deeper hole for themselves. More importantly, you establish that not all communication deserves the gift of your response. The third tool is calibrated reflection. This technique consists of returning the emotional content of the message without adopting its burden or responding to its implicit accusations. You use it when you need to maintain the relationship, but without falling into the trap of defensiveness, especially in important personal relationships or work situations with superiors, where completely ignoring isn't an option. It's implemented by acknowledging the other's emotional state without validating their conclusions. I see this deeply concerns you. Or, I understand this topic is important to you. Then you pause, allowing that acknowledgement to exist on its own, without adding defenses or explanations. The result transforms the conversation from confrontation to collaboration, without you having given up your center or explained yourself. The person feels heard while you maintain your psychological integrity intact. He who masters these 3 tools masters any difficult conversation. Now I'm going to give you a surgical plan for the next 7 days. It's not theory. It's an installation protocol for your Machiavellian mental fortress. For the first 2 days, your sole focus is to implement interrogative inversion. Don't try to apply everything at once, only this. Every time someone questions a decision you've made, insinuates criticism, or asks for explanations in a judgmental tone, and this will happen at least 3 times in these 2 days, apply the technique exactly as I taught you, no matter the context, work, family, social media, with anyone. What you'll notice, initial internal resistance on the first day, an almost physical urge to explain yourself that you'll have to consciously contain. On the second day, greater ease and a sense of strange power as you see the discomfort in the eyes of those who expected your usual defensiveness. You'll feel artificial initially, as if you're acting, which is normal. But after applying it 4 or 5 times, you'll notice a sense of internal solidity. People will respond with greater consideration before questioning you again. Pay special attention to their facial expressions immediately after your calibrated response. On days 3 and 4, you add the strategic void while keeping the first tool active. Now you're handling 2 techniques simultaneously. When someone makes a malicious comment, you not only avoid defending yourself, but you implement the complete void when appropriate. The combination creates a synergistic effect of projected psychological strength. Here, the game visibly changes because people start to think twice before mildly questioning you. You'll notice greater respect in general interactions, subtle changes in others' body language towards you, and primarily a dynamic where you have more space to express yourself without skeptical interruptions. If you feel a certain guilt for not clarifying misunderstandings, it's a sign that it's working. You're challenging your social programming to please. Adjust the intensity according to the context, being softer with important relationships. Days 5, 6, and 7 are for refinement and integration of calibrated reflection. Now you operate with the complete system. Aggressive questioning, strategic void. Criticism in an important relationship, calibrated reflection. Questioning in a doubtful tone, interrogative inversion. Specifically observe how the way people approach you changes, how they modify their tone before speaking to you, how they seem to consider their words more carefully. Adjust the intensity of each technique based on observable results. If you notice excessive resistance in certain contexts, it means you're applying the technique too rigidly and need to incorporate more warmth without compromising the central structure. At this point, you'll already feel a tangible transformation in your social energy field. It's not imagination or autosuggestion. It's the measurable result of changing the invisible rules of the social game. And this is just the beginning. But pay maximum attention now, because there are 3 fatal errors that can collapse your newly built mental fortress. Error number 1, reactive overcompensation. It looks like confidence, but in reality, it's compensatory arrogance. It occurs especially when you start to feel the power of not explaining yourself and you take it to the opposite extreme, developing an exaggerated air of superiority. The sign that you're falling into this is that you start to enjoy making others uncomfortable. Immediate consequence, increased social resistance. Consequence in days, progressive isolation. The precise correction is to maintain the structural technique but combined with genuine consideration for others, recognizing that strength is not the same as dominance. Error 2, inconsistency of implementation. You apply the techniques perfectly at work but crumble into defensiveness with your family. Many fall into this because they compartmentalize their identities. It leads to a fragmented sense of self-worth where your strength depends on the context. To avoid it, keep a mental log of your most important interactions each day, noting where you held your center and where you lost it, identifying specific patterns of vulnerability. Error 3, the most destructive, using mental strength as a substitute for genuine connection. It's the most dangerous because it disguises itself as mastery, when in reality, it's emotional avoidance. If you notice that you no longer allow yourself authentic vulnerability, even in intimate relationships, You have fallen into this abyss. The Machiavellian technique isn't to eliminate human connection. It's to protect it from manipulation. True mastery lies in knowing when to lower the drawbridge of your fortress, not in keeping it perpetually raised. Mental strength isn't armor that imprisons you. It's a foundation that frees you to connect from authenticity. Before concluding, allow me to synthesize this ancient and modern knowledge into 4 fundamental pillars that now define your new mindset. First pillar, your vulnerability to emotional manipulation doesn't come from external attacks, but from your internal need to be understood and validated at any cost, even at the cost of your personal power. Second pillar, implement the 3 Machiavellian techniques: interrogative inversion, strategic void, and calibrated reflection, as automatic responses when you feel the urge to explain yourself, defend yourself, or justify yourself. Third pillar, understand that true mental strength doesn't come from external techniques, but from a deep reconnection with your inherent self-worth that exists independently of external validations or criticisms. Fourth pillar, build your complete system of mental strength by combining precise techniques with internal self-validation, distinguishing between manipulations that require protection and genuine connections that deserve openness. These 4 pillars are not abstract theory. They are the practical architecture of an unstoppable mind that Machiavelli himself would envy. Your mind is your only true sovereign territory. Now comes your challenge, and it begins right now. In the next 24 hours, not tomorrow, not next week, in the next 24 hours, a situation will arise. It could be a questioning at work, an insinuation from your partner, or a social media comment. But it will happen. When it happens, and you'll recognize it immediately because you'll feel that visceral urge to explain yourself in detail, I want you to apply interrogative inversion exactly as I showed you, not a diluted version. The full version with the strategic pause, calibrated question, and subsequent silence. You don't need to announce you're trying something new. You don't need to explain your behavioral change. That's the beauty of the system. Simply implement the 3-second pause, formulate your brief question, and observe the immediate transformation of the dynamic. When you do it, 3 things will happen. You'll notice a visible change in the other person's facial expression. You'll feel an internal solidity that replaces your usual anxiety, and you'll confirm in real time that this system isn't theoretical. It's profoundly practical. This is your moment of truth, your opportunity to prove to yourself, not to me, not to others, to yourself, that this isn't just information, it's transformation. And after you implement it, come back and tell me specifically how the energy of the interaction changed. I want to know exactly what you saw in the other person's eyes when they expected your defensiveness and found your unmovable center. And now the password. Comment exactly this, word for word. My mental fortress is impenetrable. This isn't just a comment, it's a declaration. It's a code. It shows that you didn't just watch these minutes of video, but you absorbed them completely. That you're not part of the majority who consume and forget. You are part of the unshakable. Those who have decided to build a mental fortress that no external manipulation can penetrate. This is our password, our protocol. I will read every comment, and I will know exactly who understood the essence and who simply skimmed over it. Comment now. And since you've made it to the end, I have something special to share with you. In the next video, I'm going to show you the Machiavellian art of the perfect response. It's about a specific verbal structure that disarms any criticism without seeming defensive. Something that connects directly with what we've seen today, but from an angle that will forever transform your verbal interactions. It involves a 3-part linguistic pattern that virtually no one knows, and it explains why some people seem verbally impenetrable no matter how you try to destabilize them. But this is a topic for our next session. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The next video comes out in exactly 7 days. Remember the mental fortress we talked about at the beginning? It wasn't just a passing metaphor. It was the very essence of this message. Now you understand. It's not about building defensive walls that isolate you. It's about establishing foundations so solid that no wind of external opinion can destabilize you. You no longer need the heavy armor of constant explanations that limit you. You are the fortress itself, centered in your own immutable worth. And when you cultivate this inner strength, the world stops questioning you and starts consulting you. The fortified mind doesn't defend itself. It simply exists in its power. Now go and remember who you truly are.